In this video, we'll be going over stripping the bolt, cleaning it, reassembling it, and function checking. You're going to need a long punch and a short punch, both 1/16 inch. Long punches turn into short punches, so you can just get 2 long ones at the hardware store and you'll be fine. We're going to grab the short punch, and the first part to come out is the firing pin retaining pin, which obviously retains the firing pin. To get there, we're going to start with this triangular lug pointed up and the stem facing towards you. We're going to flip 180 degrees, and you're going to insert that short punch in this hole here. You're then going to make an L shape, an upside down L. Grab that with your dominant hand fingers, swing it up vertically, and you're going to cover, this is the pin on the other side here, you're going to kind of half cover that with your thumb. And then on a hard surface like concrete or a bench top, not like a plastic picnic table or something. And of course, if you had a bench block and a hammer, this all gets easier, but I'm showing you sort of the field expedient minimum tools method here. Using this L shape, we're going to give it a good wrap, covering that pin a little bit with our thumb on the table. That just gets the pin started. Longer punches tend to snap off eventually when you do that. So then we're going to switch to the long punch. Same method. So again, like that. We're going to tap it out like that. We're then going to pull this off. Doing this over a flat surface is a good idea so that you don't end up losing these pins in the brush. And then just tip this out, tip the firing pin out. Then we're on to removing the extractor. The extractor is captured by this pin right here. So to get to that pin, again, grab your short punch, have it upside down, rotate it clockwise, away from your perspective clockwise. Insert the short punch there. Same L shape, upside down L with your hand. And put your thumb over the top. Oops. And in this case, this one just presses out. Switch to the long punch again. A couple wraps. And now that pin is free. You're going to leave the punch in there. Pull this pin out. And the reason we left the punch in is to keep this spring captured. I'm going to yank the punch out so you can see what happens. It'll go launching. So instead what you want to do, imagine that the pin is in there, put your thumb down on your non-dominant hand, press down on that pin, pull the punch out, slowly release, and everything will remain in place. Dump those parts out. So now we should have 6 parts in total. Extractor retaining pin, extractor spring, extractor, firing pin retaining pin, bolt body. At this point, you're going to want to use a CLP or brake cleaner. I like to use a fine mesh colander, like a stainless steel colander. Don't use plastic because the brake cleaner will melt it. Put all these parts in there. Of course, you want your mesh size to be smaller than these parts. Spray them all down, scrub as much carbon off as you see fit. The AK does not mind some carbon, so it's sort of personal preference. Be sure to hose out the firing pin channel. Then spray all of this with a light machine oil like Rem Lube or Breakthrough Clean, something like that. Just not grease. It's imperative that this pin always be free to move. After that, you're going to blow compressed air or use a Q-tip or something to remove the excess oil from the inside of this channel. Oil spoils primers, so we don't want extra oil in there, spoiling primers or collecting excess dirt. Use a flashlight to inspect this channel to make sure that it's free of corrosion and debris. Remove that corrosion or debris as necessary. To reassemble, we're going to grab our extractor spring and our extractor like that. And then we're going to use gravity to help us here. Instead of trying to put this vertically into the bolt, that doesn't work so well. So we're just going to position this in our dominant hand. Position the extractor in your dominant hand with the spring in there. The spring does not have a right side or a left side. It's fine going in either direction. And then just put it into the extractor hole there. And likely when you put it in there, it'll be cockeyed a little bit. Just orient it so that the two circles line up there on the bolt face. Now we're going to make a gesture like this, like you're depressing a syringe. That's the gesture you'll need. Now we're going to grab this pin, the extractor pin does have a right and a wrong end. The blunt end that doesn't have these cut features in it is the first end to go in. And to get to that hole location, you're going to go find that triangular lug again, and then rotate about 45 degrees clockwise. I'm going to do now, and if you don't have a lot of hand strength, you can rest the bolt stem on the table and push down. Or if, you can just do the syringe thing like that. We're going to push the extractor down in and insert this pin and wiggle it a little bit till we can feel it capture the extractor there. It's critical that you line up this cut right here. See how it makes a nice kind of trough for a pin? The firing pin retaining pin captures the extractor pin right here. So when we put the firing pin retaining pin in, it's gonna lock right over that slot right there. So when you push it in, you need to just make sure that stays aligned kind of at 3 o'clock there. Okay, I'm going to take the blunt end of this punch now and just seat this pin as far as I can in, keeping that orientation the same. If it gets cockeyed, you can sometimes put some English on it and get it to rotate, but you might need to start over again, and that's just pressing on this hole here to get it out a little bit. I'm now going to press on this small flat on the end here to seat it the rest of the way home. The way to check if you've gone far enough is if you can get the firing pin retaining pin in. We're about to insert the firing pin itself. Notice that on the bottom of the bolt, which is opposite that triangle lug, there's a hole that's off to the side. You'll notice that the firing pin has a left and a right side. That notch right there is what captures the firing pin. So we see that it's set off to the right. So from this perspective, we're going to move this side, this notch, not this longer part, but the short notch is going to face that pin. We're going to keep that orientation the same and slide it into the bolt body carefully so that you don't end up jostling it and rotating it. You're just going to push down with the bolt so that you press that firing pin retaining pin back in. Notice that it's just a little proud right there. It's sticking out. We're going to use the back face of the punch again and just seat that flush. One of the really neat features of the Kalashnikov is that everything captures everything else in this design. So this can pop out, but it can only pop out so far as the top of the bolt carrier on the inside that keeps this thing from coming out. So there's no way for this pin to come out, and so we don't need a circlip or a cotter pin or anything like that. It's a really cool design. The last thing we're going to do is function check. So there's two things that the bolt does in this that move. One is the firing pin moves up and down, so we want to rattle that and make sure that it's moving freely and not sticking. If it sticks up at the top, you may need a gunsmith to polish this little hole here that the firing pin comes through. This one rattles quite freely. Life is good. Now we're going to just check that this extractor can flex. It won't be easy, but you should be able to get it to move. That's the function check. Extractor moves, firing pin rattles freely. Congratulations, you've now field stripped a bolt, cleaned it, and reassembled it. What's important now, as with any mechanical assembly we do, is to function check it and safety check it at the end. So the first part of what we're going to do is tip our receiver to the left, and we're going to press very firmly. You want to be careful to not slip here because you can gouge your Cerakote. I like using the blunt end of a tool. Your finger is not sufficient. You also don't want to lay it flat on a table, because if you're just pressing against the pin against the table, you're not going to know if the pin can pop out. We're going to firmly, with 5 or 10 pounds of pressure, push hard here and make sure that those pins don't come out. If either of those pins come out, you can have an ND, meaning that the gun can go off without you pulling the trigger. So this is a critical safety step. Again, press hard on the rear, hard on the front. This one's good. Lastly, we're going to do our function safety check. I'm going to take the gun off safe. And again, we don't have a, right now we're working kind of with a pipe. There's no bolt carrier, there's no hammer. Sorry, there's no bolt carrier, there's no bolt, no firing pin. So we're not dealing with a gun that can fire at this moment. This is a nice place to check safety. I'm going to put my thumb on the hammer and move it smoothly onto the trigger claw, which is this part right here. That's what this is. When you pull the trigger, this claw moves and lets go of this part of the hammer, which lets it fly forward, hit the firing pin, ignite the primer, ignite the gunpowder, push the bullet down the barrel. I'm then going to protect the center support again by sticking my thumb here to catch the hammer. And I'm going to squeeze the trigger to the rear and it lets go. I'm going to keep my finger pressed to the rear. This, incidentally, is a proper trigger press, okay? Hold the trigger all the way to the rear while you're firing. The gun is going to go off. The gas is going to push on the piston, which is going to push the bolt carrier back. The bolt carrier recocks the hammer, but it also catches on the disconnector, which is this little part right here. We're then going to move our trigger finger slowly forward, and I want you to focus on what happens with the hammer and the disconnector right here. So trigger's going forward, and look at that. The disconnector lets go, and the trigger claw grabs the hammer, readying it for the next shot. We're then going to depress the trigger again, pulling the trigger all the way to the rear and keeping it there, pushing it through the disconnector, letting the trigger move slowly forward, resetting the trigger. If your function doesn't look like that, please consult a gunsmith or call us up. We're now going to put the safety on to check the safety itself. And we're going to need to hold on the safety just a little bit because you can flip the safety up if you pull the trigger hard enough. The dust cover provides this function when the gun's fully assembled. Now we're going to pull, and in the case of our guns, there should be little to no movement of the trigger. And in this case, there's none. And we try to set ours just a little bit tight so that as you use it, it'll machine in and have a very small gap. If you're installing a Geisley trigger on your own, it's critical that you file this pin here, or the safety, so that there's less than an 0.008 gap between the top of that post and the bottom of the safety. So that the ALG can tolerate very little wiggle before it's unsafe. On a standard AK, there's a fair amount of travel there. So if you're watching this and you're not a 1775 customer or you have an alternate trigger, some movement is normal in the trigger. The way that you check that gap is with a piece of shim. This is one that we use in the shop. It's 7/1000 thick. And you bend it such that you can get in there and use it as a feeler gauge. However, I do not recommend doing that on your own, so please don't take this as an instructional video if you're doing that. So consult a gunsmith before you actually use the gun if you're installing your own. At this point, we're going to reassemble the rifle. So I'm going to do this quickly, but we also have a separate video on it. entitled Field Stripping, Cleaning, and Reassembly. The reason I'm reassembling here is that I want to do a final safety check of the safety with the whole thing, with the whole works in play. So I'm going to go up on safe here, and we're going to point in a safe direction because this is a firearm at this point. So point in a safe direction that would stop a bullet. Know your 4 firearm safety rules. I'm going to pull the trigger to the rear. The hammer does not fall. I'm going to take it off safe. I'm going to pull the trigger slowly to the rear. I'm then going to cycle the action while keeping the trigger depressed. I'm going to let the trigger move slowly forward, get a good reset, bring it back up on safe, check for movement of the safety. We are good. As a last check, I'm going to again depress those pins with 10 pounds of force or so and make sure they don't move at all. Our gun is now safety checked and ready to go out again.